are excited to have you guys here today. We have a really, really good discussion planned. I'm Aarti Shah. I am the executive editor at the Holmes Report, and I'm being joined by two fantastic speakers here today. Laura Brusca, and Laura, I realized I didn't clarify how to pronounce your last name. Is that correct?
It's Brusca, but it's
Brusca.
fine.
Yes.
I'm newly married, so people are still working out how to say my last name.
Oh yes, indeed. And Mark Nardone with Pan. And the way that I thought I would start things today for the kind of for this webinar on PR's future challenges, um, I, I've asked both of our presenters to, at the end of this conversation, to come up with a digestible kind of takeaway that you all can have, like 140 characters that you can take back to your offices, take back to your teams, and implement immediately. Because we'll be covering a lot of ground today, so I want to make sure that you have something tangible, like a tangible takeaway. Um, so kind of to bookend this with Twitter on both sides, to start, I am going to read both of our presenters' Twitter bios. So Laura is VP of Communications at Forbes, board member at Brusca for Africa and Super Lost Coffee, and proud mom to Insta-famous dogs, Little Lucy Goose and Little Darling Daisy. All of these have Twitter handles, by the way, so I think you can follow her dogs if you want to.
Yes, they're Instagram actually, so they're Instagram famous. Follow.
Yes, of course, they are Instagram famous, so obviously they are open probably to the public. Mark Nardone, who is EVP at Pan Communications, and his hashtags are Boston, San Francisco, and NYC, which I think is where Pan has its offices. Passionate about strategic PR, marketing, digital, and emerging brands. Can't live without golf and adore my two kids.
I can't help it. I mean, my team will tell me here that, come the summertime, I'm still working hard, but I mean, golf is a passion of mine. My wife will tell me something different, but at the end of the day, it's still something I thrive for.
And I want to let everyone tuned in today, and also those who maybe have missed it, is that we will be producing a recorded sort of a podcast from this discussion. So if you hear some things that are really interesting and you think, hey, I want to go back and re-listen to that part, that will be available. It will be syndicated on the Holmes Report's Echo Chamber podcast. If you don't already subscribe, I recommend that you do. And you can also share that with any of your colleagues who perhaps missed today, but you think would benefit from the conversation. The Holmes Report will also be covering this conversation as well. There'll be an editorial story around it. So again, if there are things that you really found interesting, you can revisit our coverage as well. So on that note, and one more thing around audience interaction. I believe you all will be able to see a chat window as you're participating. Please feel free to ask questions. You can ask them throughout the event whenever it comes to your mind. I will get to them when I can. If I don't get to them in the course of the conversation, I will give about 15 minutes at the end to make sure that we go through any audience questions as well. So yeah, we're looking forward to kind of hearing your thoughts as well. So with that, I'm going to talk quickly about just how we're structuring this webinar. I mean, really, I want this to be a conversation. I think Mark and Laura are really smart, and they came here with a lot of talking points. So I want to make sure that I kind of give them a platform to do that. But if you just think about how we're framing this, I mean, there was a survey that we will be drawing from, both a survey that we did with the Holmes Report did with Pan around re-engineering the marketing and communications department. And we will identify some of the gaps that we found in that survey. And I will also be pulling from some other Holmes Report research that we've done and some of the gaps that we've identified there. And then we'll sort of talk about what these gaps mean and what the larger trends are. And then we'll end with sort of what's next for the industry. And in particular, again, I want to hear from Mark and Laura about sort of their takeaways for all of you to kind of bring back to the office. So the first theme that we noticed was sort of the growth and integration. And before we go into the stat here, I'm going to open up with a stat that we found from our 2018 Global Communications Report at the Holmes Report. Over 2,000 PR professionals, both in-house and agency side around the world. So 70% of those that we surveyed said that the industry will change significantly over the next 5 years. And when I saw that, my question was always, what were the other percent thinking? And so I want to ask Mark and Laura quickly, kind of setting the stage, where do you think the biggest driver of that change will be?
Laura, you want to go first?
Sure. I think there's a lot of change that will be seen overall within departments in terms of integration. I think that working more closely, whether it's with your marketing team or your chief head of HR, is really important. We're really big about internal and external comms and thinking about ways that we can work really integrated within the company and ways that we can tell and bring stories to life in different ways and different storytelling methods. Thinking creatively about how to tell your story visually, thinking about it through social and through so many different platforms is really important too.
Mark,
and just to add a couple things on top of that, I feel that what we're seeing across the client base and when we're talking to CMOs is the pressure that they're faced with growth marketing, revenue marketing, being a bit more focused and personalized in some of their sales effort, which then puts a little bit more pressure on PR and content to be really personalized and targeted and segmented. And how do you make sure that earned media impacts most of that? So there's a bit more strategy opportunity for us to kind of go grab as an industry, which is presents a great challenge for us because we could start to really look at impacting a brand's funnel in a very different way, whereas we've always lived at the top of it based on awareness and everything else that we do. We are being pulled now down into more of the strategic conversion conversations around making sure that the client and the prospect coming in to either the valued sections of the website and or specific content that we want them to download is being connected with a lot of the earned media activity that we have going on in most of our programs. So it's an exciting conversations that are taking place right now, but also presents us with a really great challenge to kind of overtake.
Well, both of you touched on two things that we're going to be talking quite a bit about. One is integration, which Laura mentioned, and then PR's impact, on business and on revenue, which is another area that we'll be talking quite a bit about. So you all set the stage nicely. So as I mentioned, the Holmes report partnered with PAN on a survey last year in which we were trying to really assess kind of the state of marketing and communications. And one of the questions that we asked was, are you effectively, and this was actually just to brand side communicators, are you effectively integrating with other marketing teams? And the response that we got was actually very good. Integration is going well. 79% said they feel like this is happening effectively. So I want to first open this up to Laura and ask you, what does integration look like at Forbes? And can you tell us a little bit about how communications is structured organizationally there?
Yeah, so we actually report into our CEO, which is pretty significant. The head of our communications department has a seat at our executive steering committee meeting, which is all the top executives in the room, and they go around and really talk about what they're all working on, what challenges they're trying to solve. So he has a very important seat at that table, and I think that it's important for all PR people to really have important seats within their organization and to really be in the loop on that executive level. Even this week, we work very closely with our chief sales officer, who actually oversees the marketing and all the sales on the business side here at Forbes. In fact, we join her weekly meetings even. So I was just there on Tuesday and presented to the team everything that we're doing to support them from a communication standpoint so that they're aware. So we talked about how we're supporting our live franchises. We talked about how we're supporting client projects. And then we relayed how that helps them in their role, how they can help use that and communicate to their clients and perhaps even get clients over the line. So I think there's a lot that it's interesting when you work with the sales side of the organization and you're very close with them, how you can really see how you can affect the client, the business, and really some of the sales process as well.
And I mean, I think that communications reports directly into the CEO is significant and kind of tells you a little bit about how that function is valued.
Yeah,
we actually do. Oh, go ahead, Laura.
I was going to say our CEO really highly values communications and everything that we do. I think that, it's really important. I know that a lot of CEOs do, but it's just so important when you have a CEO that supports the function and understands how important you are to the entire organization.
But I would say, Aarti, I would jump in for a quick second and say there still needs to be a lot more education to the C-suite on the value of what we do.
Actually, that's why I was going to actually ask Laura, how does your CEO evaluate the communications function? Like, what are the metrics that your CEO uses to evaluate, whether you guys are performing the way that is expected?
Yeah, I think it's like, are we getting out there in the news? Are we getting our message out there right? Are we messaging things right? Is it the message that we want to tell? Is it the story that we want to tell? We set expectations with our CEO. So we don't want to be held to impressions. We don't want to be held to the number of, hits or the number of this or that. It's really about quality over quantity. I think that's important for everyone to try to set expectations with your C-suite. A New York Times front page story doesn't just happen. It takes relationship building, and it takes time, and it takes work. So we set expectations, and I think that's really important to everything. And the way they measure our success is partly, sometimes it's internal. Like if they're hearing the buzz internally, if everyone's talking about, wow, did you see this great media piece, or did you see this great video, or this great newsletter? If it excites the culture, it certainly helps. And then on the outer side of it, if he's getting LinkedIn messages, hey, I saw you guys in this outlet, or I saw this and that, it's a lot of anecdotal stuff that really shows the true success of, what we're doing.
So, and Mark, I want to open this up to you now and ask you, so this, the 79%, the integration is going well. Is that consistent with what you're saying? Because you sort of have more of a bird's eye view across a larger portfolio of clients.
Yeah, it's consistent. I mean, the interesting thing that we could kind of, discuss this afternoon is the variety of brand that we work with. So we go early stage emerging growth to mid-size to later stage brands. So, I can give you a lens into the dynamics of each of those kind of size of organizations. As you get to later stage, for whatever reason, CEOs maybe not so much involved in the activity of working with their agency and maybe their departments in general. And again, that goes to, there still needs to be more and more education there. As you move a little bit further downstream into maybe the mid-sized brands and emerging brands, it is definitely on every CEO's radar. And I feel one of the biggest drivers of change that we've seen is the customer experience. That, because the CMO now has pretty much total responsibility for the experience of that customer coming in, both from a pre-sale and post-sale based on loyalty programs, and overall experience with brand, with product, with employees. They've decided and made the right shift to put that right under the CMO. And that kind of has elevated the strategic importance of agencies' partnerships with brands more now than ever before. Because they don't have all the answers. They need us to make sure that we're looking at, how are we being viewed versus the competitors out there? What's message pull-through look like when we're targeting maybe growth segments, because CEOs started to put more revenue responsibility to the CMO, and they want expansion in either regions, in either industries, to specific target audiences by title. And that kind of ricochets right over to pretty much the PR and the integrated team. And then I'll also just say that, we're not going to a meeting. At the last time we'd gone to a meeting where either the head of content marketing, head of demand gen, which I kind of consider those two titles pretty much the same, social marketing, social media, and PR are all around the table, and that's from prospecting right to the engagement with the client. And it's because the value of the narrative and the stories that we're trying to move and shift have to be adjusted and personalized based on channel, and it impacts that kind of whole department. And so everybody's pretty much come together. And Aarti, 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. 5 years ago, the departments were still pretty much siloed. The CMO was faced with a lot of responsibility to drop the silos and bring those teams together. And now they're kind of maneuvering either the agency and the PR team, like Laura has over at Forbes, into that conversation to be that catalyst of collaboration.
And you're right. Things have progressed considerably over the last 5 years. but it seems like there are still challenges and growing pains around this, around integrating. In fact, I was talking to someone on the brand side just last week, and she was saying that, you know, at their organization, there are just cultural differences that still exist across these different functions, and the way that and the approach to solving some of these problems, some of these brand problems, is different, and they're still learning and figuring it out. So I wonder if both either Laura or Mark, like, what is the biggest challenge that we still face, you know, 5 years, 7 years into this sort of integration journey, that we still face as an industry?
Laura, you want to kick that off?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I think, you know, it certainly probably depends on the size of the company, right? And how big your departments are, and how many people are, how many functions, and how many things are happening. And I think it's important in terms of organizational structure to have a good structure where, you know, figuring out what is the best way to combine the forces, integrate in a way that makes sense, and then carry that message down to the other units, right? So as you grow and as companies start to get bigger, how can they align themselves and organize themselves in a way that makes sense, that makes it easier for the integration to happen, right?
Good point. Yeah, I think size is crucial here. I think, you know, this is an advantage that some of the earlier stage companies have, I think, over some of the larger ones.
I agree 100% there. But I also, you know, we deal mainly in B2B brands, and one of the biggest shifts that's taken place is, you know, the C-suite in particular, maybe not seeing a ton of sales coming in, but seeing the right sales come in. And when they're looking at the right sale that comes in, where they can say and talk to us strategically about what's the ideal customer profile look like, you know, why are we calling that an ideal customer profile for us? What's the criteria? And a lot of that has to do with both the new revenue coming in and the potential, you know, life cycle of that customer's value across, you know, 2, 3, 4 years. And that has allowed, I'm going to pick up on what Laura said, much better alignment for these teams to integrate on a page and unify, because it's allowed us to be very, very focused and personalized, but also demonstrate a very interesting lift to the C-suite. You know, where before they would say, okay, so, you know, great, what, all this awareness, all these impressions, what is it driving? We can actually show pretty much what it's driving now, because that sales and marketing divide that might have been there stronger a few years ago, it's really not there any longer. They are, what we're seeing across our client base is, you know, no more pointing of the finger. It's more, it goes back to collaboration and making sure that everybody's working off the same page.
Yeah. Right. I mean, deal flow and closing deals, accelerating the closure of deals. I think that the role that communications plays in that, I think, is becoming more and more prominent, to your point, Mark. And that is something that I do want to talk about. And Laura, did you want to get your point? And then I wanted to go to the next slide about budgets. I wanted to talk about that next.
I just think that Mark brought up a really good point about prioritizing. And I think that's something else that will lead to success for so many organizations. So many organizations have great stories to tell, have great clients to focus on. But from my standpoint, from a PR person who supports our marketing and sales team, and perhaps what we do is we promote certain client campaigns that we have, but we can't promote them all. There's so many great ones, but we always have to go back and remember, let's prioritize. Let's see, like, what will have the greatest return, what will have the greatest impact. So I think that's something else that is really critical, is prioritizing.
You know, I was at an event 2 weeks ago, and there was someone from a very big tech company, a tech company that everybody in this room knows about. And she asked a question, and her question was,
do you want to name who it is?
It was a closed door event, so I'm not going to name who it was. But she said that she had 150 stories she had been tasked to tell, and without really a plan. Like, she was just told, here's basically the sales team came to her with 150 stories and said, here, tell these stories. And she raised her hand, and she was a seasoned professional. It's not like she was junior in her career. And she said, you know, getting that integration piece, I think, was missing, because she was like, they don't understand that we can't just like throw 150 stories at people. So it feels like what they want us to do is essentially spam, and they're not strategic about it. And at a company as sophisticated as this one, I was somewhat surprised that you know, this really basic issue was like, you know, come up with a plan. Don't just say, hey, we need 150 stories, tell them. That this was still something that she was the stature of this company. So yeah, I mean, I think to your point of that prioritization and figuring out what are the stories that are going to resonate should be sort of a baseline priority. So going on to the next point, and then the next slide, which I thought was really interesting because it actually it's consistent with what we're seeing in the market, both from surveys and just anecdotally from talking to people, is that internal marketing teams are not growing at the pace that meets their needs, and neither are their budgets. And just to sort of kind of augment this stat with something that we saw from our Influence 100, and the Holmes Report Influence 100 is who we deem are the 100 most influential communicators and marketers from around the world. And basically, the majority that we saw in 2018 saw budgets flat. The ones that did see increases, they were 5% or less. And then we saw quite a few disclosed budget cuts this year, anywhere from 10 to 30%. So my question to Mark and Laura is this reflective of a macroeconomic shift where there's just less money in the pot, essentially? Or is this reflective of sort of PR and marketers getting a smaller piece of the pie?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Laura, you want me to pick up?
Yeah, you can go and then I'll go.
All right. So I think, this is an indication of where there's a bit of a shift of responsibility within what we're seeing in some of the departments. And what I mean by that is typically, we've always identified our target key decision maker to be the CMO, obviously, and or the chief communications officer, or SVP of comm, or whatever it happens to be. And I feel what's happening lately is that CMOs are starting to entrust their key individuals within their department to either influence or make specific decisions. And that's opened up a bigger opportunity for agencies to start to move across into some of these other disciplines within marketing. The 2 or 3 that come top of mind for us here is kind of how are we playing a critical role in content marketing. There is a department in a lot of our brands that we work with that all they do is drive content marketing, but we're starting to, move over into that, whether it's because they're either resource constrained or they want more ideation flowing through the narrative and the story there. So it's kind of like when you look at that CMO, which in the traditional sense has always had the budget, buying power, it's now moving amongst these other skill sets in the department, and you've got to figure out kind of how you want to kind of anchor in and move across. And we're seeing significant organic opportunity across our client base with some of these other integrated marketing activities, but all anchored in and around content and PR. How do you activate influencer relations when inside of the department, most of our clients now are identifying somebody that just manages influencer relations? In the old days on the B2B side, that was the head of analyst relations, but now they may be wearing a few different hats there. They have their own budget, whether it's through paid or organic. They've got their own. How do you move them across our story through earn? How do you connect those dots as one example? So the budget opportunity there, I'm not saying is so much of an obstacle as maybe as it was, 2 or 3 years ago, Aarti, quite honestly. It's just how are you smart as a partner to kind of work strategically with them. And you don't need everything. You know what I mean? Like, be smart with what we're kind of working with you on. Like, we use the word integrated marketing and PR all the time, but I'm also kind of honing into the term integration. Like, how do you integrate with all of these teams effectively? Like, it's not a you versus us, it's a we. And, we don't need everything inside of social, but we can help lift some social. We don't need everything inside of content, but we can play a role in content. So it's like, I think there's just a dynamic shift of like roles and responsibilities there that agencies and PR professionals in general can go out and grab.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm just coming at it from like more of a Forbes standpoint. I don't know if I necessarily agree from my perspective that we're not growing, just from my personal perspective, because I think we're a pretty high performing team, and I think that one of the things that helps is that we're adaptive and that we really try to stay ahead of what's happening. We actually have our own CMO network. We have Jenny Rooney. We have so many great insights, and we're connected to so many CMOs in the market. So I feel like luckily, being a media company, we can really tap into other CMOs so easily and understand so much of what they're going through and kind of stay ahead of the curve. So maybe it's partly too, like, if you're finding challenges, to perhaps connect more with other CMOs who are going through this too, and try to learn from them and see like how are they adapting and how are they growing, and try to take like look at some of the content that could help you grow as well.
So Laura, you pretty much answered my next question, but I do want to put this out there because I think this will be really valuable to the folks that are listening. If you are a marketer or a communicator and you want to make a case for more budget, do you have any tips as to how someone can successfully make a case for a bigger piece of the budget?
Yeah, I think you always have to remember the end goal of like what the budget will do. And I think like when you can explain to your executives in the C-suite if you give me this, it'll return this, right? So I'm taking it from a communication standpoint. Last year, my team and I wanted a bunch of video equipment. Our video team is super stretched internally here. They're doing so many videos and they're great. And we saw a great opportunity to, as a communications team, learn how to use this video equipment, edit equipment, and all that. So we actually went ahead and got permission to buy, video equipment, which, can be quite expensive. And the reason being is that we were able to show in one example how it could easily motivate and inspire employees. We created some videos at the end of last year that were super successful, that were the buzz. And basically everyone was so excited by that content that it was an easy win. It was like a no-brainer. Like, yes, absolutely, go do that. And I know that that's a small thing. I know that there are bigger budget things. Maybe you want to buy a technology or a new tool. But then if you're going to buy the new technology or the new tool, maybe think about like, okay, well, this will help my unit, but it may help your unit too. So maybe look at like if you're going to buy a new tool, social media measurement tool or something like that. Say this will help my department, but it might help your department too, and it'll help your department too, and this is why we need this. I think there's certain ways that we can all think about it in, again, an integrated way of like, if you need something, think about like at the end, like how will it help the business and how will it help the business grow?
So I think that's a good point. And Mark, I want to open it up to you for 1 second because you alluded several times in this conversation already to revenue impact and the role that communications and all of our activities really should be playing there. I want, if you could talk a little bit about what kind of ask you're getting from your clients now around how communications can show that business impact.
It kind of starts with, everybody's pretty much heard this term over the last 2 years, but when we go in and we're starting to look at looking through a sales lens, the challenges that these businesses are facing, both competitively speaking, positioning, product, whatever it happens to be, like really understanding the business challenges that they're looking to overcome. And then you immediately are starting to shift that conversation to be more more of a marketer, like public relations professionals. We're seeing it, across the board when we go in meetings. It's like what Lara's like, they're marketers. Like we have done a wonderful job as an industry moving the conversation broader, wider, more impactful, because at that point we can show, how are we driving most of the business side of either qualified sales leads, how are we driving traffic to specific valued sections of the website, how are we impacting the investment marketing's making in content based on premium pieces of content, whether it's video, whether it's ebooks, whether it's specific survey research and insights, and are we driving traffic to those sections so that now all of a sudden they're coming in and they may be coming in at a point of the funnel that's middle and they're downloading, and then what's that journey look like? PR and communicators are playing a significant role in that. And so where the conversation starts to shift a little now, Aarti, is how are we more strategic and really a wonderful resource for sales as they go out there and be assigned the top 25 or 30 accounts that they really need to get into. If they are targeting, hypothetically speaking, a CIO, and then we understand that underneath the CIO, there's 6 other titles inside of that one account that need to be influenced somehow, some way. Director of IT, IT manager, head of security, whatever it happens to be. Well, you got to think about now how that ripple effect goes over to, communications professionals, how they adjust the personalization of that content to go to somebody that's mid-manager in IT and somebody that's budget decision maker in the CIO. somebody that is impacted based on what they're looking at with regards to $1 million, $2 million technology purchase versus somebody that's using what actually the CIO is purchasing inside of one account. And then you go target through earned media, through content, through social, through engagement strategies, through influencer strategies. I mean, it's just allowed us to just be, I think, far more involved in business today with our clients.
I want to move on to digital skill set next, but one last question for you, Mark. How much are you finding that you're having to educate your clients or prospects about this opportunity to be more strategic direct around sales impact? Or are you finding that it's coming from the clients, or are you finding that you're having to educate on your end?
I think it's still two-way. I think, when we look at situations, some marketers are far more modern and advanced, Aarti, and they get it. They realize that, revenue is kind of their key barometer to success, and they're going to bring their partners along with them. So there's not much education there. It's more of a, how do you sync and execute? So as an agency and just in PR and integrated in general, we get that kind of conversation. Others are surprised because you come in with that level of strategic conversation and they're like, I didn't expect this out of an agency. So talk to me a little bit about what you mean right now. And we start to kind of dissect, why are they losing deals? How long is their sales cycle taking? What's their average deal size? Has it grown over a year, 2 years? Why isn't it? And it's not because we're moving away from earned media. It's because we want that story to make its way through earned media so that those guys can get out there and sell the right way to impact that sales cycle a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
So it kind of is this 360 kind of loop of, goes back to the customer experience, the customer journey, whether it's pre-sale, sale, and post-sale. If you're not having that type of conversation with them, both as an agency as well as internally, like Laura probably does with her sales team at Forbes, you're missing a huge strategic opportunity.
I totally agree with you. We talk about that, and it's important for us to hear from our executive team. What are your challenges? Like, what are, why didn't that sell? Like, what happened? And how can we help? Like, how can we help with the message, or how can we help with the story? And I think it's helpful getting like real feedback from people who are there and out there selling, because it really is driving the business forward. And how can you as a communicator help with that? So it's a lot about the message, and the beautiful thing about communicators and the communication groups is that we are the ones who really own the message. Like, we're the originators of the message. We start the message, and that message gets carried throughout the organization, externally and internally.
And Aarti, one thing to mention too, we've talked about this a few times, right? Which is, the erosion of trust, reputation, like that's all made it to C-suite, which they don't have the answers for, and they need the talented team like Laura may have at Forbes, and like we work with consistently, and all the agencies out there work with consistently on the corporate communication side to fix that. And
Mark, I want to talk about earned and how this sort of erosion in trust in media entities. Can we quickly just talk about digital platforms, and because I think that we have a slide on that. So I don't want to jump too far out here. So let's go back to that in just a moment. But let's quickly, because we've danced a lot around sort of skill sets and how that's changing, and Laura referenced video, and Mark, you referenced sort of influencers and how the analyst market, the landscape's changed from a B2B perspective. So let's just talk quickly about what are those core skill sets, and I'll just cue up the slide. So this is again from the survey, and the most common pain point amongst respondents was the generational gap in skill set. And my question to Mark and Laura here is, it seems like the technology is constantly changing, right? I mean, Gen X boomers, they were all about Facebook. The millennials are about Instagram. Gen Z is on TikTok, which isn't even open to brands yet, so we don't even know what that will look like. Now, like, smart speakers are now integrated into family life, and they're ubiquitous. They're commonplace for 5-year-olds to be talking to a robot on their kitchen table. So because the technology is sort of a moving target, what are the core skill sets that undermine some of this, that you all look for in your talent now, to be able to engage with and think strategically about these platforms? Because again, the platforms keep changing.
Yeah, I mean, personally, like, I always look for open-minded.
Go ahead, Laura.
I think it's important that whenever you're looking for people to be open-minded and people who try new things and aren't afraid to try new things and aren't afraid to challenge themselves. It's like an important skill set today more than ever before. You know, it's something that if you're talking about all this change and all this digital change, you have to have an open mind to, okay, at least try it, like at least test it out, at least, you know, get a sense of it.
Yeah. I'll jump in. Is Laura still going? Or
No,
I
okay.
couldn't hear him. Okay. So, you know, the wonderful thing I feel about our profession is that many of the things we learned years ago are still so relevant today. Are you creative? Are you a fantastic writer? Can you tell a wonderful story? How do you move that story across all these channels? And there's where that kind of like inflection point exists today, Aarti, which is how do you move that across channel? Hence, here comes the digital skill set. You know, I mean, I couldn't sit across from you 5 or 6 years ago and say the skill set we have inside at the agency today, SEO, optimized content, visualization of content, analytics and data, you know, would have existed. And they are there. And also, I'm sure everybody that's probably listening on this phone goes through the same thing that we're going through, as well as what Laura's going through with her team. If you're not investing a tremendous amount of time and resource in training and development to make sure that the next generation of professional is learning all of the latest and greatest skills, both across traditional and digital and everything else out there, you're going to be faced with a huge issue. And so, you know, it's kind of like we're at a pretty interesting time right now. You know, everybody talks so much about data and analytics and, you know, AI, and it's only as good as the people that are digesting the data. If you really don't understand how to read the data and how to put that data in motion as an individual, and that goes back to creativity and storytelling, you know, what good is it going to be? You can do as much data as you want, but you still got to take it and personalize it. So I think when you go across social, when you go across digital, when you think about how you're optimizing content, as our industry continues to kind of roll and evolve, paid starts to become an important play in it. You know, how do you take an organic strategy and a campaign that's resonating in market really, really well and put some paid behind it and make sure you're targeting that paid effort to show return across keywords and anything else that you're trying to optimize within campaigns and brand? We didn't do that 5 years ago. 10 years ago, they would ask us, hey, create a press release, push it out. Hey, write a byline article, place it in a trade. But I think the conversation's swaying so much more towards the agility that our clients' customers have today, the pace. Laura mentioned something earlier around the quality versus the quantity. Thank God that's finally starting to swing again. I was so tired going into meetings where they would like say, oh, I don't care. I need 400,000 followers next year, you know, and they didn't care if they paid for them or not. It's like, no, I really just want to make sure.
Following, right? So like,
right, exactly.
But who are the followers? Are they engaged? Are they good followers? You know, are they ones that you want to follow you?
Right.
So it's, you know, it's
shifted.
about quality.
It shifted back, thank God.
So I think the point that you raised, Mark, about agility, that seems to be key here, and because it kind of reinforces what Laura said about having an open mind and agility seems to be some core skill sets, which you know, because every year we do ask communicators, like, what are the skill sets? You know, judgment is always pretty high up there, but you know, but agility is one that I don't think, and it has been said in that same in the way that you put it, Mark. So I think that's a good thing for people to think about. I also want to now go back to what you said about earned, and you know, the data has showed on our end everywhere. You can just look at any research that any of the marketing organizations have done, and it's that earned works when consumers are making their buying decisions. The paid stuff seems to work around awareness, but when they actually make that decision, it's really driven by earned. And what earned is, now that's broader than it used to be for sure. So I'm curious, you know, on this conversation about skill set, there was some research actually that showed that earned traditional media is just as trusted as SEO these days. That has huge implications for our business. So I want to open this up to Mark and Laura to ask you all, like, what do you think, if you're you know, you're from the seats that you're sitting in today, I mean, what does that mean for you about what the industry needs to be thinking about and how they need to be operating, knowing that search is just as effective as traditional media today?
Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think search is key. I mean, when you like, especially like for Forbes, like when you search for so many things, like we're coming up a lot, just in the search forms because, people are looking for information on those topic areas, right? So, I think search is definitely something that like if you think about we're in this Google universe, right? Everyone is, oh, I can Google that. Oh, I can search for that. I think people are just relying on that so much more and for information. And I definitely think search is a very important part of it all. But I will say that the earned part of it all, it's still for me like it's incredibly important because it really is something that it gives it credibility. It gives it true credibility when you have this sure, you might have a press release that shows up in search high up on the ranks, right? But when it's a great piece that's by a credible reporter, by a credible source, and it's an earned piece, and it gets the message across right, and it's a true story, it has impact.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So the statistics don't lie with regards to great earned media driving great referral traffic. So, when all of a sudden you're really involved in more of the marketing conversation and you get into the analytics and you can start to talk specifically about how earned drove specific traffic to specific sections of anywhere you wanted that user or audience to go. I mean, check mark, that's beautiful, right? But the second part is something that I keep talking about here, Aarti, and that is, you know, um, search is great and you need search, there's no question about it. SEO is powerful, whether it's organic, whether it's paid, keywords, local, regional, national, global, you call it, it's all across the board. But somebody in the sales function is going to use a piece of earned media in some type of outreach
Yeah.
more strategically than they would probably anything else. Almost more than the sales collateral that's being developed because it's such a credible factor in the conversation and in the potential engagement. So now you think about, as we're starting to talk more with sales and integrate more with sales, how do you extend the shelf life of earned media across these other critical functions within the company, i.e. sales? You know what? Because like in the old days, you'd go grab your earned media, go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one. All right. And you would just roll, you're on a treadmill. You just needed the coverage. Now we're starting to slow our clients down and say, okay, you just spent some really good time securing this wonderful piece in Forbes, for example. How are you going to leverage it? How are you going to extend the shelf life of that piece of coverage across social, through your sales efforts, wherever else it's kind of going? And again, it keeps the elevation and importance of earned at such a peak. And the sales teams, they rave about it when they're getting it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's not going anywhere. It's actually, in our opinion, increasing its value.
Yes.
So on that note, I wanted to, Mark, you talked about engagement and data, and so I'm just going to jump over here. I was surprised by this slide where we asked folks to talk about their marketing departments, and only 10% said their organizations are focused on personalized marketing strategy. And given the access to data today, this was somewhat surprising. So I'm wondering from Mark and Laura, sort of why you think that this is it an issue of sort of integrating some of this data with some of the marketing or engagement strategies, or is there a sense of uncertainty around what consumers' boundaries are and how do you engage with them in a way that delights them and doesn't sort of disgust them? I guess I don't know if I use that correctly, but yeah, but my question is do you think what's the hesitation for brands according to this data, and is this even consistent with what you all are seeing, both Laura from maybe the brands that you all work with at Forbes, or even just from your own research internally, and also Mark from what you're seeing with clients and the way that they're personalizing their marketing strategies?
Yeah, my own personal standpoint is that this is surprising. I definitely think that it's something that's interesting to see that it is so low. I think that a lot of marketers are trying. My opinion is that a lot of marketers do try to personalize their strategy to customers and to the audiences that they want to reach. So it is super surprising. I'm not sure what's underneath that. Maybe to your point, there's something around the delicate balance of how to, you know, not go too deep and not too personal. I think there's certainly, you know, I think people notice it when you're getting targeted on your phone or you're getting targeted in certain ways. Sometimes it can feel a little bit, you know, creepy, and maybe there's just that balance of, again, people just are conscious of that now and trying to do it in a way that's also responsible.
I feel that with regards to the data that we're probably seeing here, it has a lot to probably do with pace. You know, everybody still moves at kind of warp speed out there on, the content they're going to produce and going on to the next, and keeping up with both the pace of the industry, the pace of the competitor pressures, the pace of the customer, and also from a sales standpoint, what's going on there. So I feel like part of that is weighted in kind of like, staying really active, involved, and aggressive in creating some form of personalization and or customer experience. But I will tell you that, these conversations come at us all the time. We're having, if there isn't one meeting that our teams here at PAN are not coming out of where they're deep diving inside of the customer experience and what it looks like. Again, going back to why aren't they buying?
I'm just curious of what you all think about where sort of the consumer limits are, right? Because you'll see the outrage, right? You'll see, Facebook and, how they've used data. You'll see Cambridge Analytica. You'll see, the big Marriott breach, which was massive. But what's interesting is it doesn't seem to ultimately change consumer behavior. Like there's this outrage moment, and I think, even with right, even if there's less engagement there, folks are still pretty highly engaged on their other platforms like Instagram or WhatsApp. So where do you think those boundaries? And I just lost my headset. Where do you think those boundaries are with consumers? Because on one hand, they'll say that their privacy is hugely important. And on the flip side of that, we aren't seeing a massive behavior shift when there are big breaches. And Mark, because you work with so many B2B companies that are probably thinking about this, because they do handle huge amounts of data, sort of what's the thinking around what will ultimately impact, their sales essentially?
Sorry, Laura, you wanted to jump in? Go ahead.
I would just say that I kind of feel like there has been some shift though in some of the stuff with everything that happened on Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and these things. I think a lot of trust has been broken. I know like tons of people have deleted apps over this, and I think in Europe you're seeing the GDPR situation, in California you're seeing privacy laws as well. And I think that a lot of that is in reaction to what's happening, and I think so certainly I think there's a lot of change that has happened because of some of this stuff. But I hear you on customer engagement. I think social media networks are certainly loved. And I think people really enjoy being able to share information, dig into information, and feel like they're connected. I think at the end of the day, there's a feeling of connection. And I think that certainly there's this shift though that I do see happening, and I think it has a lot to do around trust. And I think that will only continue to arise.
Yeah, and to take it a step further, Aarti, where it's put a lot of potential for expansion within either the comms department, the marketing department, or with working with agencies is thought leadership programs. I cannot tell you, and I'm not talking just kind of like get an executive pen a byline and place it in a journal, like place it in a trade journal. I'm talking like, okay, like here's my bench of executives. I definitely need my pillar and positioning around my CEO, his personality or her personality. What do they stand for? Kind of like what's the brand's purpose? All that kind of stuff. Keeping them in their lanes, and then also building out all these subject matter experts within that executive team to build credibility and to continue to either leverage trust or bring trust back to the brand. Because at the end of the day, I'll tell you, man, the story and the narratives are still driving the brand like never before. And we feel and we're seeing that the executive suite and more of that kind of mid-level suite that's out there talking often to the external markets are starting to kind of take this more aggressively with us, maybe. And where before we had to convince them to do something like this, now it's kind of like, what's your formula for thought leadership? Like, what does it look like? How do you assess and audit who I am and what I need to do versus other voices in the industry? How do you establish a point of view for me that's going to stick and that's going to attach well to my brand's purpose?
Yep.
And going back, Laura, to what you were saying, and I absolutely agree with you that, GDPR is an example of changes that have been made, and there has been some flux on Facebook, but it's interesting because on the flip side of it, right, we're also welcoming smart speakers into our homes, right? And I think I saw just a headline just last week that said that Google and Amazon are asking for continuous data from these speakers, from these smart speakers. So, there does seem to be this, oh my goodness, my data was used this way, but at the same time, it's like, oh, well, I'm inviting through technology, through these devices, even sort of more sort of invasion, I guess. So predicting consumer behavior around this seems to be a little tricky, and it doesn't seem to be consistent.
Yeah.
So going back then, and we're down to about less than 10 minutes, and so I just want to be mindful of inviting the audience to ask questions if anyone has those. I don't see any in my window right now, so I'm just going to keep going until I see one, and then we can pause. And I did want to take a moment, Laura, to ask you, and I think this will be useful for our listeners, from a branded content perspective on Forbes, what brand content works well? Like, what are some things to keep in mind? If there's anyone here who's thinking about, or has a relationship with Forbes around the branded content, what are some good takeaways around what works well, what engages the audience, what doesn't engage the audience?
Yeah. So we're at Forbes, we're big believers that brands are thought leaders, and brands have stories to tell, and brands have incredible content to share that is of interest to our audiences too. We have our Brand Voice content program, which is a thought leadership platform program on our site where marketers can share their stories, and they're not advertisements, they're really storytelling. They're stories that connect around themes, they connect around something, and I think when they're written well and when they're written in a way that's informative and engaging and that is actually helpful to the audience, those really succeed the most. I think a lot of times, it's partly about educating there, and then also in custom content, I think there's a lot that you can do with custom content nowadays, in terms of positioning brands as thought leaders around certain topic areas, or perhaps even engaging with influencers, and doing something really dynamic. We've done some really cool campaigns like digital publications with tech clients around the topic of AI. Some really incredible video branded content campaigns that have been just stunning visuals, where you're bringing in influencers, you're bringing in branded video, and it's so impactful on the audience. It's also like really engaging content that I want to listen to. And I think that when it feels, when you're inspiring your audience, when you're giving them content that they want, it ties into that thought leadership point that Mark brought up around the importance of thought leadership. And I think that it's really important that the brands that get into branded content take a really strong thought leadership approach with all of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're seeing a similar shift to Aarti, just so you know, where our clients are, we're talking to our clients consistently about branded content, whether it's through paid models or whether it's through organic and their own authentic branded content. The challenge that we're having is kind of setting some expectations where they can kind of like make sure that the branded content can kind of live for a little while, and you've got a really good momentum strategy behind the branded content, whether it's indexes, reports, surveys, whatever else you're trying to kind of brand out there. But we're also telling them, don't shy away from third-party collaboration, and kind of jointly develop some of these pieces of content, see what type of return you're going to get out of it. Put a little money behind it. Let us use it across earned and social and all the other areas, and let's see the type of lift and evaluate and maybe don't stick to it for so long, but see the value.
So we got an audience question. Someone is curious to hear about an example of branded content that I'm assuming it's a good example of it done very well. So I'm going to open this up to Laura or Mark. Mark, if you have an example that you want to point people to, or Laura, if there's one maybe on the site that you think is done very, very well that you want to send people to.
Yeah, I mean, for us, like one of the campaigns it's won so many awards for us because it's just been recognized as like a really high quality version of branded content is our KPMG Great Rewrite campaign. That campaign, it was incredible. It was talking about rewriting industries. We worked with this incredible guy, Leonard Brody, real thought leader in the industry, and he really was a real partner through it all. And I think if you go to the site, you'll really see what it is that makes it award winning. The content comes to life in so many ways through video and other ways, and it's just impactful. I think it's when it has an impact.
Mark, do you have a favorite piece of brand content that you wanna direct people to?
I mean, I could give you examples that are both across the client base. Many of our clients do both either semi-annual or annual reports. We have a lot of business in the security space, so you can imagine there's specific branded content and indexes where they may be surveying, chief security officers out there and kind of putting together, 5 or 10 key takeaways, and that's just it. Whether it's a client of ours called Rapid7 doing their branded report or White Ops doing a fraud report. If you go to from what we do at PAN in particular, there's some cool stuff that we do on the branded content side. We create what we call this content fitness report. It's been going on for 5 years. It's a branded content piece where we're out there and we're surveying, 100 to 200 CMOs on the health of their content year over year. We're starting to compare, what they've learned in years past, what they're looking to change moving forward. It's branded. It's got some credibility out there. The industry covers it often. Influencers are starting to pen some comments to it as well, and so it's at least becoming more recognized as a branded piece of content.
I think I'm glad that you mentioned branded reports, Mark, because we were seeing that as well. That's been incredibly effective in sort of creating a conversation around industry wide with branded. We are down to 3 minutes, and as I predicted on our prep call, we did not get through all of the slides, but there was so much on the first 13 alone that we had plenty to dig into, and we could have kept this conversation going, as both Mark and Laura have had plenty of interesting ideas. But what I'd like to do now is pause, and as I promised our listeners, they would be able to get some digestible, snackable snippet from this discussion that they can take back to their teams, to their respective offices, and implement immediately. So now we want to do the tweetable portion of this webinar, and I do not have a preference of who wants to go first and give their piece of tweetable insight. So Mark, Laura, do I have a volunteer?
I'm happy to go first.
Crickets. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
How could you say we're crickets? We talk nonstop.
I know. It was a surprising pause. Go ahead, Laura.
So, I think my best advice is really to take a seat at the table, be an advisor within your organization, get really close to all of the executives that you work with. Get close to your chief technology officer, your chief human resources officer, your sales team, your marketing team. Really integrate and get to know them, meet with them weekly, meet with them bi-weekly, join their meetings, infiltrate their meetings. Because the closer you get to all of them, the better you can do your job and the better you can help them with their jobs. So that's something that's really important to take note of. And I think, at the end, if you do that, then you win.
So get close to the executive team, attend the meetings, crush the meetings if you have to, understand what they do, understand how you can better help them do their job.
Understand their business challenge and how you can help them, definitely.
I wish I could answer this in one takeaway. So you're gonna not. I mean, I have to elaborate. One thing that we're seeing and has been true for so long is don't be afraid to be transparent. There's going to be failures. There's going to be successes. How do you learn from those failures? How do you continue to move those successes forward? The more transparent you are, the better ability to get things back where you need them to be. So that has always been kind of tried and true throughout my career, which is as transparent as you can be, the better off you're going to be. But I feel like the other areas that I did want to just quickly mention is make sure you're strategic in your conversations. Like, make sure you're addressing the business challenges that you're faced with as a brand and as a company. I will give you one quick example. I can't tell you the amount of conversations we've been having where one of our key objectives talking to brands is, how do you help me find skill set for me to continue to grow and be successful as a business? How do you help me not only position my executives as thought leaders, my product as exceptional, but recruit the best talent? And one example is AI. How do I bring the best skill set? How does PR and content communications help me fill my recruitment needs? Because if I don't have that, I don't win. And that's business. Like, that is a business impact. And, you know, like take that, own that opportunity. It's such a great possibility for us to kind of continue to stay very strategic inside of the company.
Transparency and business impact, Mark. And I think the business impact piece especially, I think, is a nice summary of what was sort of at the core of so much of what we discussed today. And again, unfortunately, we have to end now, even though, like I said, this conversation could just keep going. Amara, and thank you, Mark, for joining us today and contributing your thoughts to this topic. Thank you to the team at Pan. They worked really hard to get this to fix the technical glitches and to get us all here today. And thank you everyone for joining us. I think it's been really interesting to sort of have this conversation as an industry wide. Again, remember the content will be available on the Holmes report. You'll be able to re-listen to this as an echo chamber podcast, and you will also be able to see a write-up that sort of summarizes this conversation and sort of analyzes some of the key topics that we discussed today. And with that, I think we will close this webinar.